I overheard my daughter's conversation because she hadn't hung up the phone. I heard them discussing how it was time for me to go to a nursing home and how I had become a burden. I remained silent, but in that moment, something inside me shattered. I proceeded to sell the house for $890,000. They returned from their business trip with smiles on their faces, completely unaware of the surprise I had waiting for them. Their keys no longer worked in the lock. On the doorstep, they discovered a note, and upon reading it, they began to scream. It was then that I understood they wouldn't let this go easily. This was only the beginning. My phone rang just as I was scraping the last bit of meatloaf from my plate. It was a recipe my late wife, Maria, used to make, but my version never tasted quite the same without her touch. I glanced at the caller ID and found myself smiling despite the ache in my chest. It was my daughter, Jessica. Her voice carried a familiar warmth that always made me feel a mix of love and loneliness. I settled into Maria's old recliner, the leather worn smooth from all the years she had spent reading in it. I told her I was doing fine, having just finished dinner and about to watch the news. I left out the part about the leftovers being 3 days old and that I had been staring at Maria's photo for the better part of an hour. She asked if I was eating enough, reminding me that I could always order groceries online and mentioning the app she had shown me. I gently interrupted her, assuring her I was eating plenty, but then admitted to a minor scare the day before when I had forgotten to turn off the coffee pot burner. I mentioned that I was lucky to have smelled it from the living room. There was a pause. I could picture her frowning in the way she had inherited from her mother, with the same little crease between her eyebrows. Jessica suggested we should talk about having someone check on me more regularly. I told her that Mark, my son-in-law, thought I was fine, and then asked about their business trip to Phoenix. She confirmed the conference would end the next day and mentioned that Mark had been handling most of the client meetings while she sat through endless presentations. She laughed, but it sounded forced. She then said she needed to go because she and Mark had dinner plans with some potential investors. I told her I loved her, and she responded that she loved me too, telling me to take care of myself. I heard a click, followed by rustling sounds. I thought she must have dropped the phone in her purse and was about to hang up my end. But then I heard voices, muffled but clear enough through her phone's microphone. Jessica mentioned to Mark that she felt I was deteriorating, pointing out that I had forgotten to turn off the stove the day before and worrying that I might burn the house down. My hand froze on the receiver, and an icy chill spread through my chest. Mark told her it was time for a nursing home, saying I was becoming a burden and that she knew it. He acknowledged that I was a good man, but couldn't live alone anymore. Jessica then calculated that the house was worth almost $1 million. She said with the current market in Denver, they could probably get $900,000 or maybe even more. He agreed enthusiastically, talking about selling the house, putting me somewhere decent and not too expensive, and finally buying the house they wanted in Boulder. My daughter laughed, and I could actually hear it. She mentioned to Mark how grateful I had been just to hear from her, and added that I had no idea about their plans. She believed the longer they waited, the more confused I would become, suggesting they should act while I still trusted them completely. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor Maria and I had installed together 23 years ago. Every board had been laid by my own hands, every nail driven with thoughts of our family's future. I sat in the sudden silence of my empty house, staring at Maria's photograph. Her eyes seemed to bore into mine with an expression I couldn't quite read. Maybe disappointment, warning, or just the terrible knowledge that comes to those who've already left this world. The grandfather clock in the hallway, an anniversary gift from Maria 15 years ago, ticked steadily in the growing darkness. Outside, the first spring crickets began their evening song in the garden Maria had planted, and which I still tended. Something cold and hard settled in my chest, replacing the warmth I'd felt just moments before. My hands, weathered from decades of construction work, slowly curled into fists. They thought I was a burden. They thought I was confused and helpless, ready to be managed and discarded. They were already spending my money, already planning their new life in what they considered my grave. But I wasn't dead yet, and I wasn't nearly as confused as they believed. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark, Maria's face watching me from the silver frame on the end table. The house felt different now, as if the walls themselves had heard my daughter's betrayal and were holding their breath. My legs felt unsteady when I finally stood to turn on the lamp. The warm light fell across the living room we'd furnished piece by piece, each item chosen with care and saved for with sacrifice. The burgundy sofa where Jessica used to curl up doing homework, the coffee table I'd built in the garage, sanding it smooth while she played at my feet. I walked to the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept old receipts and papers. My fingers found the folder I was looking for without conscious thought. It contained 20 years of financial records I'd never thrown away because Maria always said you never knew when you might need them. University of Colorado tuition receipts, $48,000 over 4 years. I remembered those double shifts, coming home with concrete dust in my hair and plaster under my fingernails. Maria would have coffee waiting and would massage my shoulders while I paid bills at this very kitchen table. I recalled how she had once worried that I was working myself to death while watching me calculate tuition costs. I had told her that Jessica deserved better than we had and that she was smart enough to do anything. But Maria had cautioned me not to give her so much that she would forget to be grateful. I should have listened. I should have listened. The wedding receipts were in there, too, $32,000 for one day. I had told Jessica we could afford maybe $5,000 or $8,000 if we stretched, but she had actually cried, about wanting her dream wedding. I had worked weekends for 6 months installing hardwood floors for a contractor friend who paid me under the table. I remembered Jessica whispering that I was the best father in the world during our dance at her wedding. She had said she would never forget this, but she had forgotten. Just like she had forgotten who co-signed her first car loan when her credit wasn't good enough. Just like she had forgotten who made the calls to get her that marketing job when she was unemployed for 8 months after graduation. I found the bank statements from 2 years ago after Mark lost his financial advisor position for reasons they never fully explained. They had moved in temporarily, just until Mark found something new. I had never charged them rent. I had paid the increased utility bills and bought groceries for 3 adults instead of one lonely widower. Mark would pat my shoulder and say I was the most generous man in Colorado. Jessica would hug me and promise they would pay me back when they got on their feet. They had been on their feet for over a year now, both working good jobs and making more money than I ever had. But they had never mentioned moving out, never mentioned paying me back. There was the anniversary dinner I had paid for last month. $200 at that fancy steakhouse downtown because Mark said they deserved to celebrate. There was the car repair bill I had covered when his BMW needed a new transmission, a $3,000 expense that cleaned out my emergency fund. Mark had told his friends that I was like a father to him and how lucky he was to have married into the family. I had been proud, actually proud, to be the generous father-in-law, the man who took care of his family no matter what it cost him. I walked upstairs to Maria and my bedroom, still unchanged after 2 years. Her jewelry box sat on the dresser, her reading glasses folded beside the lamp. I opened the bottom drawer where I kept our important papers and pulled out our original house deed. It read, Frank and Maria Hayes, purchased 1999. The house was free of any complications, and now that Maria was gone, it was in my name only. Standing there in the bedroom where she had spent her last days, surrounded by everything we had built together, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp as broken glass, but underneath it, something harder was forming. They wanted to put me away and sell my life's work. They thought I was too old, too confused, too grateful for their attention to fight back. I looked at Maria's photo on the nightstand, remembering her voice from all those years ago telling me not to give so much that Jessica would forget to be grateful. Well, she had definitely forgotten, but she was about to remember that her old man wasn't as helpless as she thought. I walked to my home office and pulled out the business card I'd kept in my desk drawer for 3 years. It belonged to Brian Connor, a real estate attorney. Maria had insisted we meet with him after her cancer diagnosis, just to make sure our affairs were in order. It was time for another consultation. The next morning, I walked through my house like a stranger seeing it for the first time. But instead of seeing a home, I was seeing what Jessica and Mark saw: square footage, market value, liquid assets. In the kitchen, I ran my hand along the granite countertop I had installed myself, working by lamplight after my regular job because we couldn't afford to hire contractors. Maria had picked out the pattern, speckled gray with veins of gold that caught the morning light. She had made coffee on this counter every morning for 16 years until the cancer took her strength away. I remembered the Christmas morning when 3-year-old Jessica took her first wobbly steps right here from the refrigerator to Maria's outstretched arms. We had both cried with joy, with Maria scooping our daughter up and spinning her around while I scrambled for the camera. I remembered Maria's tearful whisper about our baby walking in the house we built for her. The living room held 25 years of Christmas mornings. I could still see 7-year-old Jessica's face lighting up at the sight of the dollhouse. I had spent 3 months building it in the garage, working in secret after she had gone to bed. Maria had sewn tiny curtains for the windows and made miniature furniture from cardboard and fabric scraps. Jessica had squealed that it was just like our real house, and it was. I had made it a perfect replica, down to the little bay window in what represented her bedroom. That bay window had cost me 6 months of overtime. Maria had seen it in a magazine and fallen in love with the idea of reading there in the afternoons. I had learned to cut angles I had never cut before, measuring and remeasuring until my back ached from crawling around the frame. I recalled Maria's concern that we couldn't afford it when she saw me marking the measurements on the wall. I had reassured her that if she wanted it, she would have it, and that I would make it work. I climbed the stairs to Jessica's old room, still painted the soft yellow she had chosen for her 16th birthday, still decorated with photos of her high school friends and college memories. This was the room where I had rocked her through colicky nights as a baby, and where Maria and I had helped her with algebra homework at the small white desk I had built to fit perfectly under the window. The master bedroom was the hardest. Maria's side of the bed still had her water glass on the nightstand, her bookmark still marking page 247 of the novel she would never finish. I had built these walk-in closets with my own hands, custom designed to fit Maria's height perfectly. Her clothes still hung there, still smelling faintly of her perfume. This was the room where we had planned our future and whispered about our dreams for Jessica. It was also where Maria had died, holding my hand while machines beeped around us. I remembered her final whispered request for me to promise not to let them take advantage of me because I was too good and too generous. She made me promise to take care of myself. I had promised, but I hadn't kept that promise, had I? In my home office, I found the folder of construction photos Maria had kept, pictures of me laying the foundation in the spring of 1999, 25 years younger and 50 pounds stronger. There were photos of my crew and me installing the frame, and of Maria in her hard hat bringing us lemonade on hot summer days, her belly just starting to show with Jessica. The financial records from those years told the story Maria's photos couldn't. A second mortgage, a personal loan from my brother, and Maria taking a part-time job at the school district to help with materials costs. We had eaten beans and rice for months, driving cars held together with prayer and duct tape. But we had built this house with our sweat, our sacrifice, and our love for each other and for the family we were creating. And now my daughter, the baby who had taken her first steps in this kitchen, the child who had played in the yard I had landscaped by hand, wanted to sell it all and put me away like an inconvenient piece of furniture. I picked up Brian Connor's business card from my desk drawer. The edges were worn from 3 years of handling, but the phone number was still clear. Jessica and Mark thought they were dealing with a confused old man who would be grateful for any scrap of attention they threw him. They thought I was weak and helpless, ready to hand over my life's work without a fight. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. I dialed Brian's number and listened to it ring, my hands steady as a stone. Outside, the spring morning was bright and clear, the kind of day Maria used to love, the kind of day for new beginnings. The law offices of Pfizer and Associates occupied the second floor of a modest brick building on Kfax Avenue. It was the kind of place that specialized in helping regular people with real problems rather than impressing corporate clients. I had chosen my best suit, the charcoal gray one Maria had picked out for me to wear to her funeral, and arrived 15 minutes early, my hands only slightly trembling as I signed in at the reception desk. Brian Connor was younger than I had expected, maybe 55, with graying temples and the patient demeanor of a man who had heard every family horror story twice. His office was lined with law books and family photos. A wife, 2 teenagers, a golden retriever, the kind of normal life Maria and I had tried to build. He greeted me and offered coffee. He remembered me and Maria and apologized for her passing. I thanked him, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice, and told him I needed to discuss a delicate matter concerning my daughter and son-in-law. He indicated he was ready to listen. I told him everything. The phone call, the overheard conversation, their plans to sell my house and put me in a nursing home. Brian's expression never changed, but I caught him shaking his head slightly when I described their eagerness to spend my money on their Boulder dream house. He said this scenario was more common than I might think, explaining that adult children often assume they know best, especially when valuable assets are involved. I asked if they could legally do anything. He wanted to confirm that the house was only in my name since Maria's passing. I confirmed that Maria and I had owned it jointly, but it had transferred to me automatically when she passed away. He made it clear that legally, they had no claim to the property and could not force me into a care facility or make decisions about my assets without my explicit consent. He emphasized that the house was mine, period. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by something sharper. I asked about my right to sell the house myself. He replied that I could put it on the market the next day if I chose to, as it was my property and my decision. He then asked why I was considering this option. I thought about Jessica's laugh when she had called me a burden, about Mark's cold calculation of my worth, about 25 years of sacrifice reduced to a real estate transaction. They think I'm helpless and confused, and that they can manage me like a piece of property. My hands clenched around the coffee cup. I told him that maybe it was time I showed them exactly how sharp my mind really was. Brian was quiet for a moment, studying my face. He noted that the Denver housing market was strong and that properties were selling quickly, often with above-asking price offers. He asked how quickly a sale could happen if I were serious about selling before their return. He explained that with the right buyer, a sale could be completed in a week or less, but warned me that it was a major decision and there would be no turning back. I told him I had built the house with my own hands, adding that I knew exactly what I was doing. We spent the next hour discussing practicalities, market value estimates, cash buyer networks, and legal requirements. He explained that he could have everything prepared within 24 hours if I was serious about proceeding. As I was leaving, Brian mentioned the $200 consultation fee, which would be applied to the legal fees if I decided to go forward with the sale. I paid in cash, feeling more clear-headed than I had in months. Walking to my truck in the spring sunshine, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time since her betrayal, I smiled. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I pictured her in some hotel lobby in Phoenix, probably checking her watch and wondering why her grateful old father wasn't jumping to answer her call. I let her wonder. I let her and Mark make their plans about my future, my house, and my life. They were in for the surprise of their lives. The phone kept ringing as I climbed into my truck, Brian Connor's business card secure in my wallet, and a plan forming in my mind that would teach my ungrateful daughter exactly who she was dealing with. I had built my life from nothing once before. I could certainly tear it down and rebuild it on my own terms. The phone finally stopped ringing, but I knew she would call back. She always did when she needed something from the old man. This time she was going to get much more than she bargained for. As I pulled into my driveway, the shaky feeling in my hands had been replaced by a newfound confidence. Brian's words echoed in my head, reminding me that the house was mine, and the decision was mine alone. It felt as though 25 years of self-doubt and second-guessing had vanished, like the morning fog disappearing under the Denver sun. The phone rang just as I was unlocking the front door. Through the window, I could see it vibrating on the kitchen counter where I had left it. My daughter Jessica's name was glowing on the screen, and for the first time since her betrayal, I smiled. I decided to let it ring for a moment, wanting her to wonder why her supposedly grateful old father wasn't scrambling to pick up. I poured a glass of water, took a deep breath, and answered on the 6th ring. Jessica's voice, full of an almost fake cheerfulness, expressed her relief at me answering. She said she had started to worry when I didn't pick up her call earlier. I apologized, telling her I had been out running errands. I kept my voice warm, asking how Phoenix was treating her. She replied that I knew how business conferences were, but told me she had wonderful news. She paused for effect, then said that she and Mark had been planning something very special for me. I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. She explained that they wanted to treat me to a vacation, saying I deserved some rest after everything that had happened since Maria passed away. Her voice was filled with a practiced sympathy that I now recognized as a tool of manipulation. She described a beautiful place they had found, saying it was like a resort, but with medical staff available in case I needed anything. A resort with medical staff. My jaw tightened so hard I thought my teeth might crack. I replied that it sounded lovely and that they really didn't need to go to such trouble for me. Mark's voice came from the background, calling it nonsense and reminding me that I was family. He must have been on speakerphone. He added that they had already made all the arrangements. I managed to ask when they were thinking of sending me, knowing they wanted me gone before they returned to claim what they saw as their inheritance. Jessica said they should be back by next Friday and were hoping I could be ready by then. She told me to just pack some clothes and personal items, the essentials. She meant not the photo albums Maria had lovingly arranged, or the furniture I had built with my own hands. Just the essentials for an old man being shuffled off to a place to die. I told her I actually had a surprise for them, too, for when they got back. Jessica sounded genuinely pleased, asking what kind of surprise. I knew she was probably imagining I'd sign some papers to make their lives easier. I walked to the bay window I had built for Maria, looking out at the garden she had planted and the porch swing where we had spent countless evenings planning our future. I said it was something I had been working on since our last conversation and that I thought they would be very surprised. She replied that I was so sweet, saying they would talk about everything when they got home and that I should get some rest. She called me sweet while plotting to take my life away. I told her I loved her, and she said she loved me, too, telling me she would see me Friday. The line went dead, and I put the phone down, my hands feeling steadier than they had in weeks. I walked to my home office, opened my laptop, and watched the screen glow with possibilities I had never considered before. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I typed in the words, "Real estate agents, Denver." The search results filled the screen, appearing like ammunition for a war I was finally ready to fight. I had always been methodical. 25 years as a construction engineer had taught me to research everything thoroughly before making a decision. Tonight, that same meticulous nature would be used for a different purpose. I clicked through agent profiles, comparing their success rates and testimonials just as I used to compare different structural steel suppliers. I looked at neighborhoods like Cherry Hills, Highlands Ranch, and University Hills, where houses sold for the kind of money Jessica and Mark were already spending in their dreams. One name kept showing up in the top results: Brian Connor. He was 43, and his specialty was quick sales, with an average of 18 days from listing to closing. His photo showed a professional smile and confident eyes, hinting at a man who could make things happen quickly. His testimonials were exactly what I needed to see. I read about houses being sold in 6 days, with a cash buyer lined up within 48 hours and a smooth closing with no complications. I stared at his direct phone number, which was displayed prominently beneath his credentials. I knew this was the moment that would set everything in motion. Once I made this call, I knew there would be no going back to being the grateful, manageable old man my daughter expected me to be. Maria's photo on my desk seemed to be watching me, and I could almost hear her voice, asking me if I was sure about what I was doing. I was sure, more certain than I had been about anything since her funeral. With steady fingers, I dialed the number. Brian Connor, the real estate agent, answered the phone. I introduced myself as Frank Hayes and explained that I was interested in a quick sale of my house, asking him how fast things could actually happen. He told me that, with the right property and pricing strategy, he had closed deals with cash buyers in as little as 10 days. He then asked what kind of timeline I was looking for. My heart hammered against my ribs when I heard 10 days. I asked if it was possible to sell that fast, and he assured me it was, noting that Denver's market was incredibly hot. He then asked for details about my house. I looked around my kitchen, seeing it through a buyer's eyes for the first time. I described it as a 2-story house, 3,400 square feet, built in 1999 in the Cherry Creek area. I mentioned it had 3 bedrooms and 2.5 bathrooms, and that I had maintained it well, doing most of the work myself over the years. Brian's voice sharpened with interest, saying my description sounded exactly like what several of his investors were looking for. He pointed out that being the original owner, having a well-maintained home, and being in an established neighborhood were premium selling points. He asked if I would be interested in a property assessment, and I asked how quickly he could come by. He offered to be there that afternoon at 3 o'clock if I was available. I glanced at the clock. It was just past noon. I told him that 3 o'clock was perfect and gave him the address. After hanging up, I sat in the sudden quiet of my kitchen, the magnitude of what I'd set in motion beginning to sink in. In just 3 hours, a stranger would walk through the house Maria and I had built together, assigning a dollar value to our memories. I spent the next 2 hours cleaning obsessively, a habit I had picked up from Maria, who had always insisted the house be spotless for any visitor. I dusted the bay window, straightened the pillows on the couch, and made sure every surface gleamed. This cleaning felt different, though. I wasn't getting ready for guests. I was preparing for an execution. At exactly 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I smoothed my shirt, took a deep breath that carried the scent of Maria's lavender sachets from the linen closet, and walked to the front door. My hand trembled slightly as it closed around the brass doorknob I had installed myself 15 years ago. Beyond that door was either my salvation or my damnation. I turned the handle and opened the door to my future. Brian Connor looked exactly like his photo, professional yet approachable, in his early 40s with the confident bearing of a man with years of successful deals. He was carrying a leather portfolio and a tablet, and the moment he stepped inside, his eyes went wide in genuine surprise. He stopped in the entryway, his gaze moving up the crown molding I had installed by hand to the hardwood floors Maria and I had selected together. He told me that this was exactly what he had been hoping for. I watched him take in the details. The way the afternoon light streamed through Maria's bay window, and the seamless flow from the living room to the dining room that I had created by removing a load-bearing wall and installing a beam. His appreciation was both genuine and professional. He remarked that I had not been kidding about maintaining the place. He pulled out his tablet and began taking photos. I told him that the hardwood floors were original and that I had installed them myself in 2001. I explained that Maria had wanted something that would last, so we went with 3/4-inch solid oak. I found myself falling into the familiar rhythm of discussing my work, feeling a sense of pride despite everything that was happening. He stopped at the granite countertop in the kitchen, running his hand along the edge. I told him it was a custom installation and that Maria had picked the pattern because she said the gold veining reminded her of sunlight. My voice caught slightly as I recalled spending 3 weekends getting the measurements perfect. He typed notes on his tablet, photographed the custom cabinets, and tested faucets and outlets with the thoroughness of someone who knew what buyers wanted. He told me honestly that in his 15 years in the business, he rarely saw properties maintained to this standard. I told him I was a former engineer and believed in building things correctly the first time. He agreed that it showed and gestured toward the living room, asking if he could see it. I nodded, following him as he admired the open floor plan, the built-in bookcases, and the way Maria's decorating choices had turned our construction project into a home. I mentioned that the bay window was custom work and that I had built it for my wife because she wanted a reading nook. I could picture her there with her mystery novels and afternoon tea, her reading glasses on her nose. Brian was now taking measurements, his excitement barely contained. He told me he needed to show me some comparable sales and pulled up listings on his tablet. He showed me how similar properties in the area were selling for $850,000 to $920,000. My chest tightened. This was more than Jessica and Mark had estimated in their cruel conversation. He said that given the condition and custom features of my home, he was thinking of pricing it at $890,000, which would move it quickly and get me top dollar. The number spun in my head, and I sat down heavily in Maria's reading chair. I managed to ask if it was really that much. He told me that I was sitting on a gold mine and that properties like mine, especially in such good condition, didn't come on the market often. His voice was full of the confidence of someone who knew his business. He mentioned that he had an investment group looking for exactly this type of property. I asked what kind of group it was. He explained that they specialized in high-quality rental properties in established neighborhoods, that they paid in cash with no financing contingencies or repair negotiations, and that they could close in 10 business days. 10 business days. I realized Jessica and Mark would return from Phoenix in 8 days, expecting to find their grateful, manageable father, ready to be shipped off to their resort. I asked what the catch was and why they wanted to move so fast. Brian smiled and explained there was no catch, that cash deals simply had no loan delays or appraisal contingencies that could kill the deal. He said they would do their own inspections, but that my house was in better shape than most new construction he had seen. I looked around the living room where Jessica had taken her first steps, where Maria and I had hosted Christmas mornings, birthday parties, and quiet Sunday afternoons reading the paper together. I asked when I would have to be out. He explained that the standard contract gave me 30 days after closing, but that they were flexible. He added that the main things were getting a clear title and completing the paperwork. I thought about Jessica's voice calling me sweet while plotting to steal my life. I thought about Mark's cold calculation, which reduced me to a burden to be managed. I thought about Maria's warning that I was too generous and too trusting. I told him we should do it. Brian's professional mask slipped for a moment, revealing genuine excitement. He told me it was an excellent choice and said he would call them right away. I watched him dial, listening as he described my property with the enthusiasm of someone who had found buried treasure. Cherry Creek area, original owner, immaculate condition, and custom features throughout. He ended the call with a broad smile, saying they wanted to move forward immediately and that he could have the initial contracts ready by the next morning. The sun was setting through Maria's bay window, casting a golden light across the room where I had just agreed to sell 25 years of my life. But for the first time since that devastating phone call, I felt something that had been missing for too long. Control. Brian's question about how 9 a.m. sounded hung in the air, and I realized he was waiting for an answer that would change everything. The grandfather clock in the hallway, Maria's 15th anniversary gift to me, ticked steadily in the silence. I told him that 9 a.m. sounded perfect. After Brian left with promises of contracts and closing timelines, I stood alone in the house that would soon belong to someone else. The evening light through Maria's windows painted everything golden, like a photograph of a life I was about to leave behind. But I didn't feel sadness. I felt anticipation. Brian arrived the next morning with contracts, a notary, and coffee for everyone, showing the kind of professional efficiency I had always respected. I read every line with the thoroughness that had made me a good engineer, checking the details just as I used to check blueprints. The sale price was $890,000, a cash purchase, with a closing date of 10 business days from signing. The notary, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, walked me through each signature. The contingencies were minimal, just the title search and final walkthrough, and I was able to remain in the house for 30 days after closing if needed. The notary confirmed this was correct, adding that most sellers prefer to move out sooner for peace of mind. Peace of mind. I almost laughed. The only peace of mind I would get would be from seeing the look on Jessica and Mark's faces when they discovered what their burden had done. I signed my name with steady hands, and just like that, the process was in motion. The first 3 days passed in a blur of paperwork and inspections. The title company began its search through decades of records, and the investors sent a polite crew who admired my workmanship and found nothing to complain about. One of them told their boss that my father-in-law, who they assumed was already gone, knew what he was doing. They called the floors and electrical work top quality. For days 4 through 6, I became a man with a secret mission, researching apartments online. I was looking for something small and comfortable, a place where I could start over with almost $900,000 in the bank. I found a place in Highlands, a senior community with golf courses and a community center, the kind of place Maria and I had sometimes talked about for our golden years. I also called storage facilities, planning which of Maria's things I would keep and which I would have to leave for the new owners. I decided to keep her china, jewelry box, and photo albums, the essentials of a life we had lived together. From day 7 through day 9, a strange confidence filled me, something I hadn't felt in years. Each morning I woke up knowing I was one step closer to freedom, one step closer to showing my daughter that her confused old father was sharper than she had ever imagined. My next-door neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, noticed the activity, asking about the inspectors and the official-looking people. I told her it was just some work being done, hating the half-truth but knowing that the full story would spread through the neighborhood before I was ready. On day 8, Brian called with final confirmation. He told me that everything was on track for the next day's closing, that the buyers were thrilled with the inspection results, and that the wire transfer would be completed the same day, giving me immediate access to the funds. That night, I packed a single suitcase with clothes and personal items, not because I was moving yet, but because I wanted to be ready for anything. I looked at Maria's photo in our dresser and whispered that I hoped she understood what I was doing. Friday morning arrived bright and clear, the kind of spring day Maria used to say was Denver at its finest. I dressed carefully in my best suit, not the funeral suit, but the navy one Maria had bought for me for Jessica's college graduation. The title company office was full of professional efficiency and congratulations. The buyers were represented by their attorney, a sharp woman who double-checked every document. Brian handled the paperwork like a conductor leading an orchestra. I was directed where to sign and initial, and with each signature it felt like cutting a chain. I signed the deed transfer and the settlement statement, making the final acknowledgement that 1247 Maple Street no longer belonged to Maine. I was then given a wire transfer confirmation showing that $890,000, minus closing costs, had been deposited into my account. I stared at the numbers on the paper, seeing more money than I had ever seen in one place, more money than Jessica and Mark had ever dreamed their burden could access. Everyone shook hands, pleased with the smooth transaction. Brian walked me to my truck and promised to stay in touch if I ever needed his services again, telling me I had made the right choice because sometimes a fresh start was exactly what we needed. I drove home through neighborhoods I had known for 25 years, past the elementary school where Jessica had learned to read, and past the park where Maria and I used to walk every Sunday morning. But instead of nostalgia, I felt a sense of liberation. I pulled into my driveway and sat in my truck, looking at the house that was no longer mine. The keys to the front door felt heavy in my palm. I knew that the next day, I would hand them over to the new owners and walk away from this chapter of my life. Jessica and Mark were due back from Phoenix in 3 days. They would arrive expecting to find their grateful, manageable father, ready to be packed off to their resort. Instead, they were going to find an empty house and a lesson they would never forget. I climbed out of my truck and walked toward my front door, reaching for my phone to make the next call in a plan that was working better than I had ever hoped. The engine ticked as it cooled in my driveway, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it off. I sat staring at the house I had built with my own hands, the house that now belonged to strangers. It was the house where Jessica and Mark expected to return and find their grateful, manageable father waiting to be shipped off. The keys to the front door felt like lead in my palm. New owners or not, I still had access for 30 days, which was enough time to complete what I had started. I drove to the Starbucks on Fax Avenue, parked in the lot, and with steady hands, dialed directory assistance for a 24-hour locksmith. The emergency fee would cost an extra $200, but money was no longer a concern. I told the locksmith, whose name was Eddie, that I needed all my door locks changed urgently and that I could pay in cash. He said he could be there in 2 hours. I gave him the address. Back at the house, I waited for Eddie in my truck, watching my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, water her garden. She waved, and I waved back, my chest tight with the knowledge that I was lying to everyone who cared about me. Eddie arrived in a van full of tools and hardware, a man in his 50s who had clearly seen every kind of lock emergency Denver had to offer. He asked if there was a security issue as he studied my front door. I told him it was a new ownership situation and that it was better to be safe than sorry. He nodded like he had heard it before and got to work. I watched him remove the locks I had installed 15 years ago, the brass hardware Maria had picked out because it matched our door knocker. He commented that they were quality locks and that whoever had installed them knew what they were doing. I told him that I had installed them and that I liked things to be done right. The new locks were silver instead of brass, modern instead of traditional. They made a sharper, more mechanical sound when Eddie tested them. He handed me 3 copies of each new key. The new locks were installed on the front, back, and garage doors. Eddie handed me a ring of keys that felt foreign in my palm. I paid him the $450 emergency fee in cash, ensuring there would be no paper trail. After Eddie left, I stood alone in the empty house and began the hardest part, packing 25 years of my life into what I could carry. I started with Maria's jewelry box and our wedding photos, and placed them into my suitcase along with the novel she had been reading. I left almost everything else, the furniture that told our story and the photo albums that chronicled Jessica's childhood. I called Sunset Manor Apartments and arranged to move into a furnished 1-bedroom immediately. When the property manager, Mrs. Chun, asked when I would like to move in, I simply said, "Tonight." She didn't ask questions. I signed the lease and paid the first month's rent plus the deposit in cash. In the gathering dusk, as I loaded my car, I caught Mrs. Patterson watching me from her window and felt the weight of all the relationships I was severing. I took one last walk through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing differently now that the house belonged to someone else. I said goodbye to Maria's memory, to the kitchen where we had taught Jessica to bake cookies, and to the living room where we had watched her open presents on Christmas morning. I locked the new locks and drove away from Maple Street for what might be the last time. The small apartment felt like a motel room, functional but soulless, with generic furniture and the lingering smell of industrial carpet cleaner. I dropped my suitcase and immediately reached for my phone, ready for the final phase of my plan. I needed to open a new bank account that would protect my money from the children who thought they deserved it. I found a smaller institution, Colorado Community Bank, that focused on personal service and discretion. I called and scheduled an appointment for Monday morning. The weekend was uncharted territory. I had never lived anywhere but the house Maria and I had built, but this tiny apartment was a place of my own choosing. On Saturday, I made coffee in the unfamiliar kitchen and methodically unpacked my belongings, placing Maria's jewelry box on the dresser, my engineering awards on a bookshelf, and our wedding photo on the nightstand. On Sunday, I found a coffee shop called Brews and Views. The barista, a young woman named Sarah with purple streaks in her hair, seemed to understand my need for quiet. I sat by the window with my coffee, watching people live their normal lives, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of anticipation instead of sadness. On Monday morning, I dressed in my best suit and drove to Colorado Community Bank. David Morrison was a professional who understood my need for discretion. I explained my situation, a widower who had sold his family home and needed a secure account. He handled the paperwork efficiently, and I signed documents that made me a client with access to nearly $900,000. On Wednesday, David called to confirm that the funds had been transferred successfully. That evening, I sat in my small apartment and ordered a mini surveillance camera disguised as a phone charger. I knew that what I was about to order would capture the final act of my revenge. Jessica and Mark were returning on Friday, expecting to find their grateful old father ready to be managed. They had no idea that their burden had become their biggest problem. While I waited for the camera, I wrote the note. My first drafts were too angry, but I finally found the right tone. Dignified, but devastating. Dear Jessica and Mark, if you're reading this, it means my plan worked perfectly. I heard your phone conversation about putting me in a nursing home because I'm a burden and heard you calculating how much money you would make from my house. The house has been sold for $890,000 cash. The money is safely in my new bank account where it will stay. I have moved to a place where I'm appreciated, not tolerated. Do not worry about me. Worry about your own housing situation. Your belongings have been packed and are being stored at Denver Moving and Storage on Fax Avenue. You have 30 days to claim them before storage fees begin. I gave you everything I had for 42 years. You repaid me by planning to warehouse me so you could steal my life's work. I hope the lesson was worth the cost. Love, Dad. On Thursday morning, the FedEx truck delivered the camera. I spent an hour testing the device, and the video quality was crystal clear. In the afternoon, I drove to my former house for the last time. I used the garage door opener, which I had never given Jessica and Mark, parking inside to avoid questions from my neighbors. My hands shook slightly as I entered. The house still smelled like home, but there were new additions that made my chest tight. Their suitcases by the stairs and their mail scattered on the kitchen counter. I positioned the camera charger by the front door outlet and taped the envelope to the door at eye level. Standing in the living room one final time, I touched the mantel where Maria's photo had sat for 23 years. "It's done, sweetheart," I whispered to her memory. "Justice served." I locked the house with my new key, tested the camera feed one more time from my car, and drove back to my apartment. I woke up on Friday morning with the anticipation of a man about to witness justice after years of injustice. My coffee tasted better than it had in weeks, and even the small apartment felt less confining as I settled into my chair with my phone, the camera feed showing my empty former doorway. At 5:15 p.m., my phone buzzed with a motion detection alert. I watched as Jeremy's black SUV pulled into the driveway. My heart hammered against my ribs as I saw them move with the casual confidence of people coming home to claim their inheritance. I watched as Jessica fumbled with her keys at the front door, unable to unlock the new locks. "That's weird." Her voice came through my phone speaker. "My keys aren't working." Jeremy tried the back door and the garage remote, his voice carrying the edge of panic I had hoped for. "Someone changed these locks," he said. They soon discovered the unlocked kitchen window. I watched my daughter climb through the window, her business suit catching on the frame. Moments later, the front door opened, and they both stopped dead when they saw the white envelope. With trembling hands, Jessica tore open the envelope. I watched their faces change from confusion to shock, to disbelief, to horror. "He sold the house," Jessica shrieked. Jeremy snatched the note from her hands. "That manipulative old bastard," he said. "He was playing us the whole time." Jessica was crying now, her makeup streaking down her cheeks as she realized the full scope of their situation. I watched them argue, their years of resentment boiling over. Jeremy reminded Jessica that she was the one who had said he was becoming a burden and had pushed for the nursing home. "Well, he was a burden," she snapped. "Look what he's done to us. We're homeless." The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. They were fighting about being homeless in my living room, just as they had planned to make me homeless in a nursing home. "Call a lawyer," Jessica said desperately. "There has to be something we can do." "With what money?" Jeremy snapped back, revealing that his job loss was more serious than she had known. I watched my daughter's face crumble as she realized the full scope of their situation. No house, no inheritance, no savings, and a husband who was unemployable. How could he be so cruel? She whispered. "He's just as cruel as you were when you called him a burden and planned to warehouse him." Jeremy shot back. I turned off the camera feed. I had seen enough. I walked to my small kitchen and opened a bottle of Maria's favorite wine, a 2018 Bordeaux we had been saving for a special occasion that never came. I poured myself a glass and raised it toward Maria's photo. "To you, my love," I said. "Justice served." The wine tasted like victory. I was no longer anyone's burden. I was my own man again, with my own money, my own choices, and my own future.